Well, Michael, first of all, good to see you. Glenn, good to see you. I don't say this lightly. I don't say this because it's just a time for affirmation back and forth, but I really mean this. And I mean this. There's few people that have helped shape me as a leader and have helped shaped our church as Michael has. And, there's few people, honestly, that have believed in me at the level Michael has as well. One of the most encouraging leaders I know and one of the most strategic. And I do everything I can to send every pastor I know to Michael. And I just so believe deeply in what's going on here. Listen, it's we got a little bit of time together. It's good to be with you guys. I think I love just being with people in the trenches that are doing the stuff. I'll tell a little bit of my story. I'll talk through a little bit about some practicals on what we're doing, my passion for this, some strategic. And really what I'd love to do is, if we could just take question and answer. I don't have all the answers, of course. We are still in the midst of, we're still technically a mobile church. I could tell you some of that story, but we bought a building, but because of COVID, I haven't even gotten into the building. I told our church we just bought the most expensive parking lot ever, because that's all we can use for the last 13 months is that you just spent a lot of money on a parking lot. So, but I'll tell you my story a little bit. Pastoring was not actually on my radar. Ministry was, but not pastoring. I grew up in a pretty conservative church, very conservative Baptist church, didn't believe in the gifts of the Spirit, didn't believe in any of that type of stuff. But when I was 17, I started attending Bethel as a high school student, as a senior. This is before Bill was there. And I was 17, I encountered God. And the night that I encountered God at just a Sunday night service, I went home and told my mom, I want to preach. That's what I want to do with my life. I wanted to be a sports commentator before that. But when I was 17, I just came home, I said, I want to preach. I'd never thought of it before that moment, but when I encountered God, I knew this is what I want to do with my life. And so really dove my senior year into youth group and into campus clubs and all that type of stuff. But my plan was, I'd read a biography on Billy Graham, and a couple itinerant speakers had come through. And so I was, at 18 years old, graduating high school, I was intent that I wanted to be an itinerant speaker. Now, you got to forgive me for this, but I'm 18, 19 years old. I have nothing to say at all. Like literally have nothing to say except for I could tell a story. But man, I felt like I want to travel and preach. So I went to college, and my plan was to go 4 years of college. I was going to get out, find an itinerant guy to intern underneath and just travel. Well, that my sophomore year of college, I came back to do an internship at Bethel as part of school credits. During that internship, Bill came. And when Bill came, our lives changed. Like I just got ruined. Renewal was happening. I'd met what would be my wife. And but my plan was still just to be itinerant. So they hire me on staff. So I intern at 19. At 20 years old, I'm the associate youth pastor. And at 21 years old, my plan was still to just go find a guy that was an itinerant and intern with him. And at 21, Bill comes to me. Bill Johnson, they come and said, hey, we'd like you to be our youth pastor at Bethel. And I turned him down. I said, no. I said, I'm not making this up. I said, I don't feel called to the local church, and I don't feel called to young people. I just want to travel and preach. And so I said no. And I was waiting. I had applied for this school where this guy would mentor you. I don't know if you guys remember Floyd McClung. Michael would. Floyd McClung, who was a YWAM pioneer and just a radical, he had been through. And so I'd applied for this like mentorship school he does. I was waiting back to hear, and I said, hey, I'm going to Colorado Springs. I don't feel called to the young people or the church, local church. They never got back to me. And so I went and I said, yes. I went back and said, hey, I'll youth pastor. And I'm not making this up. I did not say yes because I felt called, because I felt a passion for it. I said yes to youth pastoring because it was a door that was open in front of me and it sounded fun to be in charge. And so I said, yeah, I'll youth pastor. A week later, I get an acceptance letter from Floyd, but I'd already said yes. And that was, I youth pastored. I was on staff at Bethel for 18 years. And I fell in love with the local church. I fell in love with people. I fell in love with the local church. My life had always been changed by the local church, but just I had encountered a passion for revival in that time as well. It was like Bill and Lou and all that. So my burning passion for revival, I was able to connect it to God's plan for the local church. And that really how I remember John Arnott said this one time, that this is a local church revival. That the vehicle through which God wants to bring revival to the earth is a local church. And so just got a deep passion for this. So I was 18 years on staff, 12 of those as youth pastor, then 6 of them doing some other things while we were doing Jesus Culture. But still, and it sounds maybe romantic, still never thought about senior pastoring. It was not on my radar at all. I didn't quite know what it wasn't on my radar. And 2012 was a year from hell in ministry for me. But it was a test we passed, and I got a phone call right after this season, and a guy said a church that I would go to every year, a significant church, probably had 6,000 at the time. I would go every year to speak there, and I don't know if you travel and speak at all, but there are certain places where it feels like you always hit a home run. You don't know what it is. The people love you. It feels like every single message you've ever spoke there is the best message you've ever spoke. This is one of those places. And the pastor called me and said, I was probably 36 at the time, and said, hey, what do you think about coming and taking our church? He didn't have anybody in his 30s who was a leader that could preach. He was in his 50s and kind of wanted to transition some stuff. And I just said, no, I don't, I'm good. And, but I couldn't shake it. Long story, I couldn't shake it. And so I go sit down with Chris Valentin, who's spiritual father and my boss. And I sat down with him and said, Chris, I got a call 2 weeks ago and I can't quite shake it. And Chris said, man, maybe the Lord's in it. That started a process for us of exploring whether we were supposed to. It wasn't what we were supposed to do, but it sparked something in me that it was time to go and it was time to plant, and God was calling us to plant a local church. So that started us a journey of just saying, where are we going? What does this look like? We have a name recognition. I'm bringing a bunch of famous worship leaders with me. We could probably go anywhere, and just started praying in. Nothing was coming alive. And in a couple of years before, somebody had sent me a dream about Sacramento. I don't need to get into that, but we realized that the Lord had prophetically named Sacramento. And so we came down here and just, moved. We're here for 15 months before we planted. We can talk about some of that as well, about, I think, how you should move into a city. But we did that, and Jesus Culture had been birthed in this whole time. So a bunch of that crew that had been with me since my youth pastoring days. So some people may not know this, but Chris Kilala, who's 38, and one of our main worship leaders, he was 12 when I started youth ministry. This is the amount of video games I played with this kid during his teen years. He practically lived at my house. Kim, and so he's 38, still with us. Kim, who had just turned 18, had moved to Reading, got involved in our youth group. So there was this whole kind of youth team that had matured and grown. And that group, we kind of moved to go plant this church. So we moved about 7.5 years ago, we moved about, coming up on 8 years, and planted about 6.5 years ago. And easily the most, well, if you could take COVID out for a minute, even though I think God's been doing some amazing stuff in COVID, easily the most satisfying, fulfilling, rewarding season I've ever experienced being a local church pastor. It's no joke. Like, it's way different than a conference or ministry or things like that. Like, it's a different level of leadership for sure. And I was uncertain of how well I would do. A lot of people were like, it's going to be amazing. Everybody's so positive when you plant, and God bless them for that, but half the time I'm like, dude, you're just not practical. But I I wasn't a great youth pastor. I was a young youth pastor, and consistency. But man, I tell you what, the rhythm, the ability to shape and form a community, the ability to do life together, by far the most rewarding and fulfilling season of my ministry has been just being a part of planting a local church, and now being able to send another church and dreaming about planting churches and things like that. It's just been incredible, and it's been good for my soul, and it's been so rewarding. So rewarding. Even on Sunday, we haven't met on Sundays. We haven't had a Sunday service for like 390 days or something. And last Sunday we met for the first time, and just seeing people that I have not seen in a long time. It just was like, It's amazing what it does. So that's kind of my story. So I'm not a reluctant church planner, but I was a surprised church planner. And I was also a sober church planner, if that makes sense. Even with all of our resources, even with all of our stuff, church planting and 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 pastoring local, and I mean this, is another level of leadership compared to even what we were doing. Even conference ministry itinerant, you're talking to all the top people in the room. They're all hungry and want to be there. You're not having to navigate certain things, and and so really, really have enjoyed it a ton. And I'm in with Michael on this thing. Like, I think that Michael's influenced me greatly on this. Is that one? I have a deep passion for the local church, for the role the local church plays in the life of a believer, but for the role that the local church plays in the life of a city. Like these two things, I have such a passion for local churches because of the role they play in the life of a believer, to develop them, mature them, to make them look like Jesus, and the role they play in the life of a city. And I would echo what Michael is saying. He's the one that influenced me on this. We're not doing the math. We need so many more churches, not just because churches and statistics do show this, that they are the greatest kind of catalyst for evangelism, but even beyond that, the harvest is coming. I'm not sure what container we're putting people in right now. I don't know what the container is that we're putting people in. And we see all the mega churches, and I'm for those, and we're maybe one of them. But the backbone really of the church in America for sure is not mega churches. I mean, they're the ones that everybody would know, but the bulk of the church is still in those small to medium size. And so where's the container for the harvest? He puts the lonely in a family? Like we're not doing the math around this stuff. And so I have a real passion for that. And I would say this as well about my passion for local church, for planting in particular. I feel there's an innovation when it comes to planting, where when we say we want to shape the next generation of church, we want to shape the next generation of how pastoring is done. We're not throwing out the old, but we're going to go press in for the new type deal. That when you can do it, and we were just talking to somebody, when you have an established church for a long time, it is a lot harder to challenge things and to innovate. Man, when we planted the church, I could challenge everything. We'd be like, we should have communion we should have communion. Why? Well, I don't know. You have communion on the first Sunday of every month. Well, why? I mean, that's a simple little thing, but like every single thing, you can be like, I don't know, should we do that? Should we not do that? And the thing of, well, we've always done it that way, that doesn't even exist in our thing. So I'm like, I don't know, what should we do? And there's a level of innovation and creativity and the ability to challenge things. It's very interesting. And I would say this, that I think that, I don't know if anybody's taken a church here, so forgive me for this. I think you equally have the same length of time, 3 to 5 to 7 years, whether you take a church or whether you plant a church, to really establish it. But when you take a church, you're having to not only build, but you're having to dismantle. So you're having to dismantle and build simultaneously. Where when you plant a church, you're not having to dismantle everything. And my point with that is there's an innovation that comes with that. I'm around pastors, guys, who wouldn't attend their church if they weren't pastoring it. And this is an issue. I'm like, but because they get so stuck in, well, I think people would leave if we're innovative, and I get it. Hear me on this. This is not like a knock on them. Like finances are a real thing, and like everybody, it'd be great if we were just free and never worried about that. But so I get it. But they're in systems. Well, if I shut that down, it would hurt those feelings. And what if this happened? And what if that happened? Where it's so much harder to dismantle. It's possible, and some people are called to it. It's harder to dismantle, though, while we're doing this. And so there's something about church planting that brings it. We killed stuff. Like Our church didn't even look like we do something and it wasn't working. We're like, it's gone. We're like, where was that thing that we were doing? It's gone. And like, we're not doing it anymore. And there's just a level of freedom and creativity and innovation. And you've got this grace from people to like figure things out. And I think some of the most innovative, creative, like, where's the church heading, comes from people who are going to be planting churches, because just the nature of church planting is you can just challenge everything, ask questions. You don't have to dismantle anything. You don't have to, like, do we want a men's ministry? And we have one, but I'm like, I don't know. Do we want a men's ministry? Maybe we do. And the thing of like, well, we've always had a men's ministry. We have a men's faster. We don't have any of that type of stuff. Does that make sense what I'm saying, everybody? And so I am just so for church planting, because not just because of the harvest, but because I think they're the ones that are going to push the innovation around what church should look like. And I also think they're the ones that reach the next generation. This sounds horrible, and I think you can be a well-established church, but there's just something about, in school cafeterias, and there's something about having to figure it out, and there's something about, and forgive me for all this, but you don't have your Lion of Judah banners hanging on the wall. And I say that with love, but a lot of churches are not thinking through, when a 25-year-old walks in this room, do they think this is a church for my parents, or do they think this is a church for me?
Yeah.
And so forgive me for this. I'm not trying to go after Lion of Judah banners, but sometimes we're not thinking through that type of stuff. And so we're wondering, like, why aren't we reaching the next generation? I'm like, well, they're walking in thinking this is a church for their parents. Church planters naturally don't have, Michael, I'm not trying to go after Lion of Judah banners, but are you
Make
tracking
some messes.
are you tracking with what I'm saying on that? Like,
Yeah.
like church planters don't have a Lion of Judah banner up. That a lady made from 10 years ago, or 20 years ago during renewal or whatever else. And so church planners, there's just this natural, fresh kind of wind with them that I think is very attractive to the young families, young adults, that kind of realm. And so if we're going to reach the next generation, we have to plant churches. We have to plant churches. And so I have a real passion for all of that. I have some stuff that I'll just talk about what we did in building culture, but do we stop and ask questions, or what do you want, Michael?
Let me just touch on a couple of things really quickly. I'd love you to drill down into what you talked about with moving with a team, because some of our planters on this call didn't have a team. Some of them did. I mean, I had lunch with 25 different planters coming into San Francisco over the 30 years I was there, and seriously, most of them failed. But the ones that succeeded had a good team. Okay, talk about that. And then also talk about the way in which you were able to honor the existing pastors and build a bridge with them as you came in. You weren't, I mean, literally, I had at least 10 or 12 different planters come in and say, with all due respect, buddy, move over, basically.
No, totally.
What they were saying to me. So talk about those two things for a minute, because that would be really helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. The team aspect, I think, is huge. This is going to be a blanket statement, but I think one of the problems that church planners run into is because they haven't set up their world financially. What happens is they're needing to start because they need to get finances coming in. And so, we not only came with a team that I'd been developing for a long time, but when we got there, we didn't plant right away. In fact, we didn't know when we were going to plant. This is the crazy thing. We could have started right away and had a crowd because there was a big buzz around us coming. We waited 15 months to open the doors because we were really focusing on a team. So we brought a team, but then we were building a team. And I'll talk to you about culture, but I'll maybe mention this. And we kept thinking this: if I want to build a skyscraper, then we have to dig a 4-story hole first. Like, you don't just put a skyscraper up, you go dig a 4-story hole to lay a foundation. And what we realized was, I don't know when that foundation will be done. So ARC, which I love ARC, hear me on this, I love ARC. But ARC's model would be pick a date and hit it. We were always like, well, how do I know if we'll be ready by that date? How do I know if our 4-story hole, and this is around whether or not our team is ready? How will we know if that 4-story hole is dug yet? by that date. So about every 3 months, we'd stop and say, do we feel, because we had to have about a 3-month, runway in order to launch. We'd say, do we feel like we're ready yet? And we'd be like, I don't feel like we're ready yet. Okay. And so we just continue to build into this team. And the goal was this. The goal was that our team was carrying our culture. Now, this may sound crazy because I brought some with us and then we added some. And we had a significant number. We had a great church planning story. So I'll just, and we had we had an ideal situation on some stuff, but I realized that much of our team was not carrying the culture of what I wanted in the church. So we said, before we open the doors, we want to make sure that we've got this nucleus carrying our culture. There's a passage that Paul writes. Let me find this for you real quick. There's a passage that Paul writes. Okay, here it is. Listen to this. So when Paul says, you're the letter written in our hearts, do you know that passage in 2 Corinthians 3? Mm-hmm. The Message translation puts it this way. He says, does it sound like we're patting ourselves on the back, insisting on our credentials, asserting our authority? Well, we're not. And he says this. He says, neither do we need letter of endorsements either to you or from you. You yourselves are all the endorsement we need. Your very lives are a letter that anyone can read by just looking at you.
Wow.
So what we knew is this. We have to, I said, when we open the doors, I do not want to hand people a brochure. I want to point them at people. So when they come and say, what do you believe about worship? I don't want to hand them a brochure that we've created that tells them what we believe about worship. I want to say, see John over there? That's what we believe about worship. That's what we believe about worship. What do you believe about serving? Well, here's what we believe about serving. I want to say, see Ann over there? That's what we believe about serving. And Paul said this. Paul said, I don't need a letter of recommendation. Do you want to know why? Because your lives are the only endorsement I need. And if anybody needs to see who Paul is, if anybody needs to know what Paul's about, then go look at the lives of those letters that have been written in the heart. And so my point of this is now listen, we had a financial ability to do it. And this is why I'm trying to get church planners to say, you cannot be rushed by finances. And that may not be practical, but if you can somehow set yourself up to where you don't feel rushed to have to plant so you can start getting the tithe in. Because as I'm building a core, I want to know, hey, are you guys the letter yet? This was the question we were asking. Are you guys the letter yet? And there was a point where we realized you are the letter. You're the letter. Let's open the doors. We've got a group that's actually the letter of recommendation when it comes to culture. So not only had I spent 20 years developing relationships and building a team just in what we were doing, and they moved with us, but also we were very focused on that. That was our big thing. And I'll talk to you about culture. Your number one priority, in my opinion, is to build culture. More than gathering a crowd, more than anything, to build culture. But that culture has to start with, what I would call leaven. So we would describe it as leaven leadership. Like, do you have the leaven that's going to go into the lump? Do you have that? And those are those culture carriers. So that's the team concept. You can ask questions if you want in a second. The second thing is this, and this was my heart, but this happened by accident. When I was in Reading, we were very connected to youth pastors. We had a whole youth pastor wide movement, and Bethel, especially back in the day, was the circus. That's what everybody believed. All the other churches were like, Bethel's weird, Bethel's the circus. I'm pretty sure they're sacrificing goats and pigeons on Sundays. So like, this was the feel in Reading with these churches. But we had built an incredible relationship with these youth pastors. So they would go like, I think that's a circus, but you're not a clown. And I'm a little bit confused by that, because you love the word of God and you love Jesus and you're kind and you know what I mean? So we had done a good job of building a relationship in the midst of people not quite sure what to do. So when we moved, that's just our heart. We believe in the Big C church. We believe in the citywide church. We're in that thing. So when we came down and I said, well, I don't know when we're going to be ready to plant, but I started going to all the pastors' gatherings, and I had time on my hands. I met with I probably met in 15 months. Well, I don't want to exaggerate. 45 pastors one-on-one over coffee or lunch. I'd meet with anybody. I'd be like, hey, you want to go to coffee? Hey, you're a pastor. You want to go to lunch? And we would just meet with them. And I mean, these are people that love Bethel, didn't know Bethel, didn't like Bethel, predominantly Black churches, Hispanic churches, whatever. I mean, I just meet with everybody and just sit across the table. And what it did was, one, it connected us in. I still have many relationships from people from this. But two, for us especially, because people did shift over to our church. Like, we didn't grow our church all from salvations. That's just not accurate. But there was a sense that Banning and Jesus Culture, our team players, care about us. This was the big thing for me. And Michael, this is what Michael would attest to and what he said, guys coming in. The reality is, and I love Michael and I love myself with this, I'm just saying, Michael's not the gatekeeper of San Francisco, right? Michael's not the one that sits up there with a scepter saying, you may plant and you may not. At the end of the day, Jesus is the one that's he's sending people or not sending people. So it's not like pastors were going to say, no, you can't plant, or no, you can't. What I found is that most pastors just want to know you care. Like, most pastors just want to know, one, that you honor them, in all honesty, and two, that you care. Like, you just care. I care about you and your church. Most of these bigger movements that roll in that just don't care. That's what I found. Because we even had some people come from their church, but we still had a great connection and they loved me because they knew I cared. I genuinely cared. I cared about them. I cared about their church. I'm for the city. I'm for the team. And in fact, we had to start on Sunday nights because we didn't have a morning venue. So I invited 7 or 8 from not just the Sacramento area, but our kind of immediate suburb area. I invited 7 or 8 of these pastors, senior pastors from the area. They came out Sunday night. And I got up first service and I just said, man, I just want to honor these pastors. I said, they have sown seeds that we're going to reap, and they have plowed the field and they have cried the tears. And I said, and also I want them to bless us. And I said, this isn't like some hoop I'm jumping through or something cute. Like, I really genuinely believe they have authority to bless us. So we have them get up and pray over us that first Sunday. And that was just and we're doing that in San Diego right now. So Zach's down there. He won't plant for 15 months. He's way more relational than I am. I think he's met with like 60 or 70 pastors, just one-on-one. And so that was kind of our model, both in building team and making sure that 4-story hole is dug, and that they are culture carriers, that I actually could point at them and say, oh, do you want to know what we're all about? Look at them. That's what we're all about. That's all the letter I need for you to understand who we are. And then, and I'm not saying we did this perfectly. It's very easy to look. I'm just saying this was at least our goal. Yeah. And then the issue of just with churches and just for them. And then also, guys, we have a firm belief in, we just give to churches locally too. Anybody that's got building, not anybody, you guys take all my exaggeration and knock it down a couple notches, okay? But all these churches in the city that are fundraising for their building or whatever else, man, we're in. We're like, yes, we're, and it's amazing churches don't do that. It's really, really amazing when you just say, hey, here's money for your building. Hey, here's money for that thing. Hey, whatever else. So does that answer that, Michael? Or anybody have any questions about that?
So good. And, everybody, this is an incredible opportunity to ask Banning your choice question. And do we have a few?
We have a question from Chris about that very first group of leaders that you want to pick. So Chris, you want to articulate your?
Yeah, sure. Hey, Banning. Thanks
Hello.
so much. That's amazing. By the way, I'm executive pastor at a small church in Baltimore. So
come on. Okay, excellent. Yeah. Love it.
And quick background, we're coming out of lockdown. Preceding that and then in lockdown, I feel like most of our core leadership left, transitioned out, moved on. So we have a new kind of group of people. Some are a bit more faithful, some are a bit more talented, some are somewhere in the middle. And so I'd love to hear from you, that first group of leaders, maybe not the ones you came with, but the ones you found in the first kind of year or two. Like, how do you identify them? How do you recruit the right people, and then how do you train them up? That's probably a lot, but any thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, one, guys, listen, I think that you need quality over quantity. So I'm just going to tell you that right now. We love bodies in the room. It makes us feel better. It's exciting to say we got a leadership team of 40, whatever else. I would way rather have the right 10 people than 40 people. So I think there has to be some level of intentionality around that. We did what was called team church. So we just called it team church. We met every Sunday. You could only be invited into it. We didn't promote it. There's no social media, anything like that. And people would kind of hear about it and they'd say, hey, and we just interview them. And then we wouldn't let some in. We kind of let some in. We wouldn't let some others in. And we're looking for leaders, not just servants. And I think there's a difference. I do believe in servant leadership, but some people are just eager to serve. Others have the capacity to lead. And I think, so we're looking through that type of stuff, we're looking through, and guys, this is going to be where I'm probably no good in these settings in this. We're very spirit-led. I'm not trying to be cheesy with that, but I would just pay attention to, I think you're supposed to be with us. Or I don't think you're supposed to be with us. Like we full on would just pay attention to these type of things as we would go. And this is what, guys, this is what I believe with all my heart. Jesus, if you truly have been sent, and maybe that's another class about whether or not you've been sent or not. But if you truly have been sent, hear me on this. Jesus is going to build your church. He's really good at it. And he's already set things up. What I mean by that is there's a team that he is forming. He is forming a team. And so you have to pay attention to it. You have to be aware of it, but he will bring people to you and it will be random. It will be random, but like, wow, I didn't even know I needed you, but I need you. The amount of people that came, and we even had again, we started big and all that type of stuff, but there'd be people I'm like, it's amazing how you got connected with us. We needed you. We needed you to do what God was calling us to do. So if you'll pay attention, and if you'll say, Jesus, I believe that you're building this church, who's the team you're bringing here to build your church? What are you doing? And we just lean into that a lot. Somebody asked this real quick, and I can go through. I mean, we are looking for, there is culture we're looking for. I don't think you have to carry our culture at first. Like, I think part of my job is to develop our culture in you, not just expect you to be carrying our culture. But there is a level of, if somebody doesn't believe in the supernatural, I'm probably not bringing them on that team. Like, there's just some things that like, oh, just come when we open the doors. But I don't know if I'm going to work through I got to get you to believe, you're a cessationist. Well, it's things like that, if that makes sense. Somebody here, and it's a similar, is it possible to build 11 leadership team who can carry your culture where they're working out their faith journey in their own hearts? So James, great question. I'm working with wonderful but newly spirit-filled believers. Great question. And it's a very hard question to answer because I don't know exactly where you mean on their faith journey. So that, like, I'm a believer that get people involved right away. It's a matter of what I'm empowering them to. So even we used to, in our youth group, have two layers of leadership. I legitimately, in youth group, my philosophy was all you guys can lead. And we had a leadership team that everybody could come to, but the first level was all serving. It was like, you were a greeter, you were setting up chairs, you were helping with sound. You weren't actually ministering from the stage or developing people. So at some level, I'm not sure ministry from stage and developing people that can happen with people that are trying to figure their faith out, if that makes sense. I don't know where that line is, but empowering you to develop people, and I'm talking about, that means reproducing who we are in them. And here's my point with this, guys. I don't give my 12-year-old son the keys to the car. He's just not ready for it. He's not developed enough to be able to handle that. And so we look at that as well. It doesn't mean you're not involved in our family. It doesn't mean you can't contribute. Doesn't mean you can't jump in. Doesn't mean you can't do a lot of things, but you don't get the keys to the car yet. Like I do need to, know that you're going to handle that. So it's a little bit hard. I would say get everybody involved.
Yeah.
I want everybody involved. Because if you're part of this family, I don't care how immature you are. I don't care where you are in your faith. There's a place to be involved for sure. When it comes to ministry from the stage, developing people or leading people, that's probably a different ballgame. And James, I don't even know if that answers your question.
Yeah. Well, one thing to add to that is John Wimber had 6 levels of involvement. Okay. And he had 3 levels of worker, 3 levels of leader. And it was really helpful to think in those terms because, we have the Sacramento River here, they dammed it up in a number of places. So in order to get the fish up where they need to breed, they created fish ladders. And I think in order to bring people in, and that's one thing I've seen with Banning, I was part of those initial team meetings, and he was introducing the elements course at that time, and bringing those people in step by step into greater levels of maturity and responsibility. It was awesome. So anyway.
Hey, that's so true, Michael. I'm looking for something. Forgive me for this, guys. My computer is not searching. Somebody asked me about the core values. We created something called a culture book, and I want to show it to you. Except for I need to see if I can find it. I don't know why my computer is not letting me look stuff up. Hold on a second, guys. I apologize. Where would the culture book be? My computer is now frozen.
Might be slower because you're on Zoom,
Yeah, what is going on with that? All right, guys, we create, can you get, this is bad if we're, it is so slower on Zoom. I need it. So we created the big thing, the question that you're asking around, here we go. I think I can share this with you.
Yeah, go ahead.
Except for we have 13 values now. So this is a version that's still not done. So I'm going to share, hold on one second. So somebody's asking about what these things are. And I would challenge you on this, guys. Building culture is top thing. It is the thing that you have to be most intentional about. What's the culture you're building? Your goal is not to gather a crowd, it's to build a culture. So it's really, really important, guys. Your goal is not to gather a crowd, it's to build a culture. So you want to go from crowd to community to family. That crowd to community to family is a path that flows when you understand the culture that you're trying to build. And so these are the questions that I would ask. And I'm going to show you something. This is what we were asking early on. Who are we? Who are we? And how do we communicate who we are? So those took a long time. Who are we? Like, who are we? How do we communicate who we are? And how do we communicate who we are was almost as hard as figuring out who are we? Because you can have a list of like, well, here's 100 things that we are, but how do I actually communicate that in a way? How do we actually deliberately, intentionally communicate that? So who are we? How do we communicate who we are? And then connected to that, it was people systems. How do we connect people to who we are? And how do we raise up leaders who carry who we are?
Ooh, so good.
And so this level of intentionality took a long time. Who are we? How do we communicate who we are? How do we connect people to who we are, which are systems? And then how do we raise up leaders to carry who we are? And then to ultimately reproduce who we are. So those things take some time. And culture's huge. I'm going to share this culture book with you. But culture's huge because like, you need momentum in culture. I'm in a lot of places sometimes where I'm like, there's not momentum here because you haven't established the right culture. So the illustration I would use is, and this is your job as leaders and especially as church planners, and when we're talking about that team. So did anybody grow up with like an above ground pool? You know those above ground pools. So across the street from me when I was in elementary school, this girl had an above ground pool. And so as the little neighborhood kids, we'd go over there you know, and it kind of comes up to here on us when you're little. And we'd play for a little bit, and then somebody would say, let's do a whirlpool. We're like, okay. And we'd all get to one side together, and then we'd all start moving in the same direction. And we'd all just slowly start moving until all of a sudden that group going in the same direction for a certain period of time, all of a sudden created this momentum where all of a sudden what we were pushing now is starting to carry us along. And this is culture for us. Like leadership is about getting the right people headed in the right direction together. Like getting the right people to head in the right direction together. And when that happens, all of a sudden, culture's created. And when culture's created, it's why if you go to a church that has a culture of generosity, you kind of walk in and you just know we're to give. It's a culture of small groups. Oh, we're to get plugged into a small group. It's a culture of the supernatural, whatever else it is. It's a culture of serving. Oh, that's what we do around here. But when you're not intentional about, first of all, where am I asking people to go with me? What is that culture that I'm wanting to create? All of a sudden, you've got people try to do that while 4 of that group are all headed in different directions. You can't get that thing going. Does that make sense what I'm saying? I see this all the time in teams. And so for us, we said, we have to get very intentional about the culture we're trying to create. So we created something called a culture book. I stole this from, I stole the idea. I'll tell you where I stole the idea. I have it up, but let me see if I can get a later one. Hold on one second, guys. Culture book, is there a 6.0?
No, one thing while you're looking for that, Banning, there's another question about how did you differentiate your culture from Bethel culture as you started developing culture? In other words, Bethel has a strong cultural set of factors, and I know that you're mostly aligned with those, but you had a few things that were unique to you. How did you differentiate a little bit?
Yeah, great question. Well, I could tell you right now for Bethel. So when I first started meeting with Bill, the tension that I was feeling was this. Bethel was the most empowering place I've ever been. They let us build Jesus culture. But I could begin to feel something. I talked to Bill. I said, Bill, I love what you've allowed me to build in my room, but I feel a desire to own my own house. I want to father something. So for me, that was a lot of the journey of like, well, what does my house look like? And I really believe that the kingdom manifests differently through different people. It's not different, right? It manifests uniquely. How would I say that, Michael? It's not a different kingdom. But I heard a guy say one time about preaching, that preaching is the delivery of truth through personality. In other words, truth coming through personality is what preaching is about. And so I have to know what my personality is. If I'm going to be an effective communicator, I have to know what my personality is and not trying to be somebody else's personality. Does that make sense? I feel that the leadership is similar in that the kingdom is being expressed through my leadership, which is different than Bill's leadership. And so when we came down, a lot of that was exploring, what is that? What is that? Like I love BMWs that have gasoline, but I want to build a Tesla. Well, it sounds different. Like we're going the same thing. But it just sounds different. And so really having to work through what those things were. I would say this, and this is going to sound harsh. How do I say this? Because none of this is negative. Bethel is more apostolic center than it is local church. Bill is a local church pastor to his core. So don't, this is not a negative what I'm saying. But when you have almost 2,000 new people move in every year for a school and then not leave, and the majority of that church is there because they moved there, it's different dynamics. And everybody moved there to be a part of that. So Bethel has hurdles that you will never get away with if those hurdles are at your church. You just have to hear me on this. So Bethel goes, well, you got to park a mile away. You have to come 30 minutes early if you want to get your kids in kids ministry. When the room is 80% full, we don't start a new service. We don't start a new service when the room's 120% full. We just figure out overflow rooms. And it's exciting, except for local church guys. If you have a young family that's never been to church, away from God, wanting to come check things out, and they can't find parking. They can't find a seat. Their kids can't get in kids ministry. It's not going to work. So a lot of what we had to figure out, well, what does revival culture, what does a passion for his presence, what does a worship culture, signs and wonders, what does all that look like in a setting that by nature can't be like, I can't have, so there's something called the movie theater rule. The movie theater rule is that when people come into a movie theater, they're looking for the places where nobody's sitting, because it's kind of awkward to come sit next to somebody you don't know at a movie. So you're trying to find spots, unless it's like the opening of Star Wars. But when it's the opening of Star Wars, you don't need to sit next to somebody because they're a dork just like you. You know what I'm saying? You're like, dude, you're stoked. I'm stoked. Man, you automatically have a connection with this person. So you don't mind sitting next to them. But outside of that, you don't want to. The problem is when somebody comes in that doesn't know anybody, they don't know if they're going to be accepted. They don't know anybody. And then they can't find a seat, or they're having to like move past a bunch of people to sit down. So we had to kind of learn a bunch of that type of stuff of what does a hunger for his presence? What does revival culture? What does that look like in a setting that isn't 4-hour services, that isn't like, hey, good luck finding a seat, isn't that you're going to jump over every hurdle we put in front of you. Like you can't get your kids in kids ministry, but you're going to keep coming back because that's what you moved here for. I don't know if that even answers your question, but that was a lot of our journey. And then here's the other one. And guys, I don't even know, this may be blasphemous, but Bill said something one time that gave me a lot of freedom. When somebody asked him one time in a meeting, they said, hey, this was not antagonistic, but they said signs and wonders aren't the only thing in the kingdom. And he said, I believe that. He goes, I believe that. He said, I believe that. He said, but we have a call. And he goes, when a body is deficient in a mineral, you overemphasize that mineral until the body becomes sufficient. So he said, so we are overemphasizing certain things because the body of Christ is deficient. Here's the problem, not the problem. Here's the tension. When we were there and then moved, when you don't overemphasize certain things, it feels like you're underemphasizing them.
Yeah.
And that was a weird thing to walk through. I mean, we're seeing miracles, like all that, like I now have to qualify. And none of it was a thing of like, no, this isn't us. We weren't swinging a different direction. But as we came down to explore, what is it that God's calling us to emphasize? What is it that we're called to go after? And in many ways, we're coming from an environment that had won that land. That territory is ours. I don't have to fight for that territory. Bill overemphasized and took some ground that I don't have to fight for. It's ours. So why would I be fighting for that ground when it's already ours? Let's go fight for some other ground. And it was very interesting to navigate after 18 years being in an environment that overemphasized certain things, to then not feel like I'm devaluing certain things simply because I'm not emphasizing the same level while we're trying to figure out what to do. And that's a journey I think you have to go on yourself.
That is awesome. Hey, you guys, we're approaching the hour mark, which is kind of, unfortunately for me, Bethel, I teach a class at Bethel that changed their time, so I have to pop off the call. So Glenn, I'm going to ask you to take over hosting. Can you look at other questions? But I also want to make sure, Banning has just a ream of material that he can share on this whole thing. I want to make sure that, Banning, you have a chance to also kind of plug the last few things that you want to say. But Banning's agreed to stay on for about another 15 minutes to make sure we're covering questions. So I really want to, I have to go, but Glenn, you're going to take the calm at this moment. But thank you, Banning. This is amazing. I wish we had like 4 hours with you. I feel like you're brimming over with just incredible stuff. And I'm sure everybody else is just as grateful as I am. But, I really also want you just to pray for people as we close, just
awesome.
At the end of the questions, if you can just bring some impartation of vision and
I love it.
understanding. So, okay. So Glenn, I'll turn it over to you. God bless you guys, and I'll see you next week.
Michael, do you want to just say just for a second who is coming next week?
Yeah, Daniel Yang will be on next week, and Daniel works with Ed Stetzer, and he's kind of he loves kind of the stuff that many of us as charismatics are into, but he's actually rooted at Wheaton College in a more sort of standard evangelical world, but he's doing some innovative stuff with church planting. He's part of what's called the Send Institute. They're passionate for this presence of God, but they're also very connected to sort of the mainstream evangelical church in a way that I'm not. And so I'm super excited about him coming on board, talking about the greater picture of the body of Christ and the preparation that other movements are doing in pursuit of church planting, but also he's planting a church. And so he has some very practical stuff to share about what he's learning. So that's Daniel Yang. And then Kathy Harris will be on after that. Kathy's been on this call as well. But so Glenn, take it away.
Got it. Okay,
God bless you guys.
But Benny, did you find your?
I did. I did.
Yeah,
Let me share this culture book. Let me answer this, Lori, real quick. Did you build your structure as you went along, or did you do it from the beginning? My leadership style would be, one, I talk to anybody and everybody. So I knew 2 years before we're going to plant. Before we planted, it was about a 2-year process. I knew we were going to plant, but we hadn't. I talked to every single church planter, whether you did it 50 years ago, a year or 5 months ago, whether you had a church of 50,000 or you had a church of 5, I was asking questions. So I will say this, I ask a ton of questions to people when I meet them. And so I feel like we were able to get a really good understanding of what we wanted to build, what we were getting into, because I just asked so many people questions, and there's pretty common themes. One of those was that the first wave of people are your scaffolding, not your building. What that shifted for us, though, was I was like, well, why would I spend a bunch of time trying to keep the scaffolding in seats? Let's go find who the building is. And we spent the majority of our effort in the early days, not on trying to keep people in seats, but finding out who the actual foundational people are, not just the scaffolding. But we figured that out through just talking to people and realizing, oh, there's a common theme in this. The other, my style as well as this is I'm a strategic thinker. I'm thinking ahead. But until I really get in it, sometimes I'm not sure what I want. So we are like, we try to plan, we do the best we can, but sometimes I'll get into it and go, okay, I now, like, it's just the style of, eventually I'm like, I did all the planning. Until I really get into it, I'm not going to fully know what we're doing. Let me show you this real quick. I'm going to share this screen. So we did this thing called the culture book. And it mainly is, let me figure out how to get this. So Passion City Church in Atlanta does a culture book, and Charity Water does something similar. And so we kind of morphed these. So this is just I'm going to fly through them real quick. I actually describe what revival is. There's a lot of people, when you use the word revival, especially if they just don't know what you're talking about. So we actually had to define it. But here's our values: presence, humility, generosity, ownership, honor, excellence. I need to make this smaller. Hold on. Yeah. Honor, excellence, prayer, creativity, scripture, love, eternity, power, prophetic. So that would be our 13 core values. Then what we did was, and that took a while, guys. It's amazing how long this stuff actually takes to actually iron out. Like, it's a lot of just, in fact, we only had 10, and then we printed books that were 10. I'm like, we're missing a couple. Then what we did was we created, sorry guys. Then we created practices, and there's 13 practices, and then we kind of write them. We're not, and then I kind of describe what they are. We're not trying to impress people, give 100% every day and everything. A higher standard is our standard. Revival starts in the home. We find joy even in the middle seat. That's a story that I tell. So it's just about, not, we have a lot of millennials that we deal with. And sometimes I'm like, it's a joy to serve Jesus, everybody. We don't do disconnect. We pick up trash. We embrace change. We lead from his presence. I think we spelled presence wrong. Our love language is words of affirmation with a side of cheese. We are passionate about growth. No crooked signs. This has to do with excellence, is in the details. We believe in the tithe. I can send this if you guys want it. I mean, I can, hold on, let me get back to, I can send this if you guys want it. But so we were very much trying to, and this became more important when the staff and the team and the volunteer team was getting bigger. We were needing to put something down to where our leaders could use it to help develop. So 13 core values, 13 practices, and then we just kind of teach through this. Now, also, here's the thing, Zach Curry, who's in Sacramento right now, he's doing the same thing. He's got a teen church going. He's teaching through this. He's taking 13 weeks to teach a value and a practice. And it's part of what we're using as we're building that core team and building culture. Can I put it in the chat? Do I send it to you, Glenn? Oh, I can put the file directly in the chat.
Yeah, it'll be fine. Yeah, it'll work.
I feel like Jordan's judging me right now by saying that. I feel like there's a little bit of am I right with that? A little bit of a, all right, let me see if I can.
No, Jordan's facilitating what you're doing, Banning.
Jordan's going like, don't be an idiot. All right, I'm gonna.
You're way more successful than me. I have nothing to judge.
I need to find where this is. Okay, there it is. Let me see if this is it, guys, and I'll send it to you. I'm gonna put this in the chat. Let's see if it works. I don't know why my. Oh, it's going to. Sorry, guys. This is. How do I go to everyone? I don't know if anybody, Glenn, anybody else have any questions?
Yeah, let's see. We've got some we've kind of already touched on about values in the culture. Let's see. How did you fund yourself as you began planting?
Yeah, so this was a little bit of a unique situation we had. Jesus Culture came with us. So we had built, Jesus Culture was funding itself. So we had a staff and and then we were able to bring the resources of Jesus Culture with us. I will say this though, it's amazing when you can get the right team church together. What 90, let's say you get 100 just for the sake of things. 100 people tithing in team church is equivalent to a church of 500 people. So when you get the right people in team church and they're actually tithing.
What do you mean by team church though? What do you say?
Team church was the church was the launch team. So we did something called team church before we opened up the church. We had a group of people we were meeting every week with and doing church with. They were the core team that was going to launch the church. So, and we slowly built that. We let people in on that thing. Well, everybody that's there is tithing. Because they're all in at that level. Like these people that are not tithers are not coming into that group. And it's amazing how far you can go because, you know, most churches are dealing with 10 to 20% of tithers. Well, if I get 100 people that are all tithing, it's a church of 500. Does that make sense what I'm saying? How I'm getting to that math?
Right.
So I'm saying that if you can get the right people in your core team, even though you're building and they're tithing, you can actually begin to build a budget even off of that. But having said all that, we had finances from Jesus Culture.
Yeah. Okay. Let's see. We had a question from Teresa. As you are stepping into your next church plant, what DNA are you looking to keep in your new church plant's leadership team versus what are you more willing to be flexible on as they actually create their own identity and place in a new city?
Yeah, well, I'm unwilling to be flexible on DNA. I do think the manifestation of how that works is probably different, but they're going to be carrying our culture. Here's the difference. They have our name. So if we're just sending a church planner out and covering them, there's probably something. I'm not looking for McDonald's down there. So I'm not that. Zach Curry is the pastor. He's underneath me still. And he was with us for a long time. So the DNA will be the same. It will manifest differently. They might have different focuses. They might focus a little bit more on, I don't, who knows? I'm trying to think of an example there. So there's absolute freedom for him to kind of manifest, but it's going to be like that culture book I sent. You're going to run into that in San Diego. You're going to run into that in San Diego. Also, our philosophy of church. So we have a philosophy of church of organization that leads to organic, and he's not going to veer from that either. So we have a philosophy of church that it should be a family, that organization should be leading to organic, that the goal is to mature believers, and that much of our structure has kept immature believers. We have a philosophy that a pot is important for a plant. At first, it's important. It helps provide some structure. It helps protect that seed. It helps, keep water in there. But eventually that pot, which helped at first, hinders later on. And it doesn't kill the plant. It just keeps them immature. So we have a philosophy that there's much organization that, although may be helpful at the beginning, isn't actually helpful later on. And so can you have organization that leads to organic? Are we actually maturing believers? So all of that stuff is going to be the same. I want them to run into the same culture. There may be differences down there, obviously, because they are in San Diego, it's different, and wherever else, if we have churches in England, or they have to be able to reach their community and their culture, but you're going to run into the same heart and the same DNA.
Okay, so we've got the link is in the chat window there, and you can just click on it to download it, everybody. Okay, and we got a question here. Let's see, can you speak a little to find the balance between good structure and organization and being spirit-led and apostolically led?
Alistair, where are you at? Where's Alistair?
Hey, Banning. I'm at Catch Fire London with Stu Glasborough.
Yeah, I love Stu. I just talked to him a couple of days ago. Can you give me a little bit more context on your question?
Yeah, sure. So I think I don't want to say evangelical churches are organized and structured and charismatic churches are disorganized and just go with the flow. But for brevity's sake, that
gotcha. I get the generality. I don't know, man. I have I think ultimately spirit-led. Here, let me just speak to, I was at Bethel for 18 years. We worked with a lot of obviously spirit-led, presence-driven, renewal, like those type of churches. My concern with them was that I didn't get a lot of it. There wasn't a lot of intentionality. And so our goal, if you cut me at the core, I want God to move. I want a move of God. That's what I want at my core. But we also are like, how can we marry John Maxwell and Catherine Kuhlman? How can we have little Johnny Maxwell's and little Johnny Kuhlman's and Katie Maxwell's running around? Like, is it possible to marry those two things? And what I found was that many times in kind of the charismatic renewal movement, the river renewal movement for sure, that my heart was alive and drawn. Like, this is what I was birthed in. This is what I longed for. I want God to move. I won't be satisfied without his presence or a move of God, but I would have to go outside those circles to get some practical leadership structure stuff. Like, how do I raise up this is what I love about Michael. Honestly, I'm not just saying this, but what Michael and Glenn are doing is like their structure. Like, well, how do I raise up a leadership team, and why aren't I keeping people? And there was things like, guys, I think that leaders are aware and intentional. I think they're prophetically aware. I think they're relationally aware. I think they're personally aware. I think they're seasonally aware. I think leaders are aware, like they're paying attention. But I also think that leaders are intentional. And so what I would find is, and this may be a silly example, but I would walk into one of these churches and there's no intentionality at all in their lobby. None. Nobody has thought through in their lobby. What's the experience of somebody walking in here? I'm new. I'm a single mom. Where do I go? Nobody's thought through what they should do as signs. Nobody's paid attention to what that crooked sign on the wall communicates. Nobody's saying, what are we communicating the minute people are walking in? Nobody's going like, hey, if I'm a new family, like I don't like, even we would start going through our children's ministry is Game Changers, but we would start going like, well, if you don't go to our church, how would you even know what Game Changers is? So we'd make sure it said kids ministry. So my point is that sometimes I think there's the spirit led, but there's not a lot of intentionality around what are you doing? Why are you doing it? Have you thought? And some of this is just this is why I think that you need to have some critical thinkers in your environment who don't just suck the life out of it negatively, but people who are critically thinking through some things. And what are we doing with our lobby? What are we doing with our lobby? What are we trying to accomplish in our lobby? I don't know if you know this right now, but they right now say that your lobby should be at least half the size of your sanctuary, and that your lobby, I actually heard of a church that had 2 campuses. One was growing, one wasn't, and they attributed it to the size of the lobby because the lobby is where everybody was gathering and building connections and lingering after the service and coming early. Well, are we intentionally thinking through that stuff? Are we intentionally thinking through what does that make sense what I'm saying? So for me, it's not an either or. And if you're going to press me, I want God to show up more than I want a good lobby. At the end of the day, my priorities are not messed up in regards to that. I'd rather have a lobby that's junky and something and just have because God's presence is what changes lives. Having said that, let's have some intentionality about the lobby. Let's have some intentionality about how we raise up leaders. Let's have some intentionality about what we're doing. Let's have some intentionality about what we're doing for guests. What's all of your people processes? Okay, what's your guest process? What's your community process? What's your leadership development process? What are those processes? And then what we would do is this, interesting enough, we started sending our teams to other churches that weren't presence driven, but phenomenal at raising up volunteers, big churches. And I would send our team and say, go figure out what they're doing so well. How are they so Passion City Church in Atlanta? We sent our team out there to see how they do volunteers. And it was so amazing because they had like a doctor running one of their, like a pastor of their kids ministry. He's a doctor, has a job, shows up every Sunday morning at 5 a.m. excited to be there. And I was like, I don't know what you're doing, but tell me what you're doing. Because we have to raise up volunteers and we have to develop leaders. Why are you so good at it? So we would just go, wow. So I don't know if that answers your question, but we try to be very intentional while also keeping at our core, God, if you don't show up, none of this matters. Does that help?
Yeah, it's really helpful. Thanks, Bannon. Really appreciate it.
And then I'm not stressed though, if things aren't going well, like if the lobby isn't fantastic, I'm not running around circles stressed, upset with our team. If we don't have a great lobby, God can't do anything at our church. Like that's where it gets like weird. It's like it's video announcements. It didn't go well. It's not going to make or break your church. But that's that thing where people are so insecure that if the performance is not perfect, and I'm like, no. And there's a massive difference between performance and excellence, which we don't need to get into, but that would be my answer.
No, I was actually part of the church there for the first 5 years, and Banny would use
one of those
the
guys.
first several years. He would say, "Well, hey, we're a church plant. Sorry that the lighting's not right, or that." Use that for at least about 3 years, right? So
yeah, absolutely. You have so much leeway. We're like, sorry guys, we're a church plant. I don't know what to tell you. In fact, until we get into a building, I'm going to call ourselves a church plant.
Okay, we got one from Brian. I'm in North Carolina, in a city that is predominantly absent of the supernatural, afraid of the prophetic, and stuck on building Bible-based churches. What are some tips for navigating the opposition initially from the other local churches?
For me, it'd be all relationship, Brian. I mean, I'd be moving towards them. I'd be going to lunch with them. I think they need to see, 1, that you're authentic, that you're real, 2, that you are for them, and 3, that you love the Bible. at the end of the day, the knock on so much of us is that we just are like not Bible teaching people. We love the word of God. We love the inerrant, authoritative. We've submitted our lives to the word of God. We love the prophetic, but it's submitted to the word of God. Like, we love scripture. So that if you can just move towards people, I think that they really do. One, they're kind of disarmed just relationally. And then honestly, I'd be giving to them. If I heard about a building campaign, if I heard about a missions trip they're taking, if I heard about their youth group is trying to raise some money for something, we're sending them money. And the Bible says this about making friends with unrighteous mammon. It is amazing. I'm telling you, it is amazing what generosity will do to break down walls. And it is amazing how many churches are not generous. Not generous at all. They won't give $500. They won't give $500. So you show up and go, hey, we heard about something your youth group's doing. We came to our church. We took an offering for you. Here's $3,000. Love what you're doing. I'm just telling you, man, it's, and then I would just be real and authentic. Listen, we're a people that love Jesus. We're a people that are passionate about revival. And this may not apply to everybody in here. Forgive me for this. And I went and watched the last Marvel movie. Like, there's a level of we enjoy life as well, you know. And so people, when like the prophetic or the supernatural or all that type of stuff, it's this weird category. If they don't know anybody in it, it's this weird category they have you in that's just not accurate. And then I love Benny Hinn, so forgive me for this. I'm not trying to, but you're not wearing suits and you don't have a 100-person choir and you're not like whatever they saw, like that's not you. But you did see somebody healed of stage 4 cancer last week. You know what I mean? So how hard was the church plan for you compared to lead someone to Jesus? I don't know how to answer that. Yeah, it's a great question. I don't know how to answer that. I don't know. I wouldn't use the word hard for them. Both of them are their own journey, I guess, at some level. I mean, both are journey-based things for me. Even leading someone to Jesus is that friendship. You know, I'm going to show them love by building that friendship. So that's a great question that I don't know how to answer.
Talk
Yeah.
for a sec about what have you guys seen in terms of evangelism happening through the church?
Yeah. So here would be my take, and I'm going to preface this with other churches are doing a better job and seeing more fruit than we are. So, but I really believe that when it comes to evangelism, we have to equip people to go do this. And this is the harder thing. I believe that much of the American church especially is built around bring people on Sunday, we'll share the gospel to get them saved. And it's and Billy Graham, who's an idol of mine, but it's a very Billy Graham model. And I think that ultimately we have to really understand what the fivefold is about. The fivefold is not to do the ministry, it's to equip for the ministry. So in other words, an evangelist's job is not actually to get people saved. An evangelist, their fivefold governmental role is not to get people saved. That's every believer's job. Yeah. Biblically, if you read Ephesians 4, an evangelist has the same job as a pastor, teacher, apostle, prophet. It's to equip the saints and to encourage them and to help mature them, to help grow them. Now, an evangelist should be seeing people get saved because they're a believer, not because they're an evangelist. A pastor should be pastoring people because they're a believer, and believers are called to pastor each other. But their job, so the evangelist's job is to raise the water level of evangelism and equip believers for evangelism. So this is a little bit of a harder struggle though, because we have churches that are just naturally geared toward it's an evangelist's job to get people saved. It's my pastor's job to get people saved. It's that group, it's the whatever it is. And I think we have to make a shift. I remember hearing a church, and it kind of wrecked me. A church in Latin America where they didn't do salvation calls on Sunday. They just asked people who got saved that week. So they would get up and say, hey, we want to know who got saved this week. And people would raise their hand and they'd say, welcome. welcome to the family. So there were people getting saved all week long, and then Sunday they would just welcome the people that got saved to church. Like, so that's something for me that this is an experiment. And I want to tell you, churches, other churches are seeing more people saved than we are. So you got to, this is me working through what I believe biblically and philosophically about how we should be raising up evangelists. But I think that that we've got to get, and this is the other thing, is that people, the church sometimes is built around people not doing things. So with good intentions, pastors, so they'll look and say, hey, my people aren't sharing the gospel. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to start on Sunday sharing the gospel, and I'll do that. Or our people aren't discipling. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to create a class where I can get 100 people in a room with one person teaching them, because our people aren't discipling. So rather than, and it's a good heart, it's good intentions, but rather than saying people aren't being discipled, well, why aren't we raising up disciplers? Where are the disciplers? The goal is not, the solution is not to scale it. So this is going to be crazy. I have a friend, we were talking this philosophy. He's an executive pastor of a church of about 10,000. He called me and said, hey, tell me more about what you're talking about. I said, all right, tell me your structure. He starts talking through the structure, and they have a hospital visitation pastor on staff. They have a hospital visitation pastor. And I said, well, what's that pastor do? And he goes, well, he visits people in the hospital, and he's got a couple people that will do it with him. I said, well, I said, that would be a problem for me, because it's not a pastor's job to visit people in the hospital. I don't know if this will mess up your theology or not. Biblically, it's not a pastor's job to visit people in the hospital. It's the body of Christ's job to visit people in the hospital. Like, it's community's job to visit people in the hospital. It's believers' job to visit people in the hospital. We all should be visiting people in the hospital, not because we're paid staff, but because we're believers who are visiting people in the hospital. But here's what happens. People don't visit people in the hospital. So our solution is, let's hire a staff member who visits people in the hospital. The problem is now everybody thinks it's the hospital visitations pastor job to visit people in the hospital, and so I don't visit people in the hospital. I call the church and ask if he can go visit people in the hospital, rather than going, oh, there's somebody in the hospital I know, I should go visit them. There's a need in front of me, I should meet it. Instead of make a phone call or send a request in and have this guy go do it because that's what he's paid to do. I'm telling you, it's not biblical. It's not biblical. And if you want a hospital visitation pastor, then biblically their mandate should be to raise up hospital visitation people, to raise the level of hospital visitation in the church. That should be their mandate, not that I go do that. Is that making sense what I'm saying? Okay. And without realizing it, we create structures and hire people that don't actually require from people that they go live their Christian life. Come on now, if you guys go visit somebody in the hospital, that's not a form I fill out online to tell you about a guy that's in the hospital that needs somebody to visit them. That's me that's going to visit them. And I will tell you, when I visit people in the hospital, I'm not doing it because I'm a paid pastor. I'm doing it because I'm a believer. I'm a Christian, and I should be visiting people in the hospital. Okay, there's my soapbox.
Amen. No, that's so good. That's why we have in our small group model, we have the fivefold represented in the team, that all those functions should be right there within the actual small group. Okay, so this is so good, but we're up at 10:28. I know you probably got to go. Benny, would you pray some impartation for us, and then we should probably wrap it up.
Yeah, Jesus, so grateful. I really genuinely mean this. I'm so grateful for this group that's willing to serve your body, that's willing to go do the difficult work of planting and discipling and raising up teams. Those that are doing it without resources, those that are doing it with resources. But Lord, this is what we pray. Jesus, what I am convinced is this: you're building your church and you're really good at it. That you're actually simply inviting us along in the journey of planting your church. So God, I pray for innovation. I pray for insight. I pray for revelation. I pray for resources. I pray for people, for teams and leaders. God, that you would put an anointing on us to pastor, to plant, and to continue to plant. And Lord, we just pray great grace and blessing and innovation, creativity, that they would become magnets for resources, financial resources, people resources, idea resources. And we just bless them in the name of Jesus.